Christadelphian religion was founded in the 19th century by an English medical doctor named John Thomas, who was working in the United States before the Civil War. He owned Negro slaves of his own and opposed their emancipation. In a letter to Robert Roberts dated December 1865, he mocked those who worked to free the slaves, who he called the eternal niggers. Dr. Thomas was involved in the Restorationist movement in America, which sought to restore the original Christian beliefs of the early church. In 1837 he was baptized into the Disciples of Christ religion, but 10 years later he resigned and was rebaptized himself because his views on Christian doctrine had changed. He left his wife, who was sick with tuberculosis, and travelled to Britain. There he deceived the Disciples of Christ Church into thinking that he was still a member of their religion, and he lectured to their congregations about his new beliefs, which were different to their own. Being a charismatic preacher, he converted some of the disciples of Christ to his own understanding of Christian belief and caused a split. Dr. Thomas's side of the split became the Christadelphian religion. Dr. Thomas wrote extensively on Bible prophecy, but almost none of his predictions came true. For example, he wrongly predicted that Christ would return to the earth in 1866. He was keen for the Christadelphians to kill unbelievers and steal their worldly wealth when Christ returned. In his book Anatolia he wrote, "The estates of all the misers of this present evil world will be turned to the hands of Jesus and his brethren. Only when that time comes they won't have to wait till the death of the misers. They will take possession and turn the owners of adrift, in most cases, into the grave." Robert Roberts, who was Dr. Thomas's successor in leading the religion, was equally sadistic in his description of Christadelphian behaviour at the return of Christ. In his book Christendom Astray, Roberts called the Christadelphian saints and wrote, "The earth's population will be greatly thinned. The saints cooperate with Christ in executing the judgments written. It will be their privilege to execute vengeance and punishments upon the people, leaving a residue composed of the meek and submissive, who will constitute the willing subjects of Messiah's kingdom." The Christadelphian religion was founded by this pair of deceitful, psychopathic and heartless men. As could be expected from such a paranoid religion, there were numerous arguments, splits and divisions over trivial matters, such as who would be raised at the resurrection and whether divorce and remarriage was permitted. The result was multiple different fellowships, often containing only a handful of members. Marriage outside the faith was forbidden, and because the religion was so small, it was difficult for younger members to find suitable marriage partners. Christadelphians thought themselves to be superior to the rest of society, who they called Gentiles. They refused to vote in elections or serve on juries. They refused to serve in the police force or armed services. Isolated inside their holier-than-thou religion, they became increasingly dysfunctional within society. In the early 1960s, the religion began to take on an anti-intellectual, anti-science character as they adopted young earth creationism and flood geology from the American evangelical movement. Serious Bible study was mostly abandoned. Instead, Christadelphians today offer simplistic spiritual platitudes from a surface-skimming reading of the Bible. Now the religion is dying. Its members are mostly elderly, and providing care homes is its major function. Every month the Christadelphian magazine lists the names of those who have passed away, but it records very few baptisms. The outreach work of the Christadelphians is ineffective because the religion has made itself irrelevant to society. It opposes evolution and science and offers ancient Bible prophecies as evidence that the Bible is true. No one takes them seriously anymore. They have become a quaint old religious sect who are nothing more than a living museum. It is a religion of death, decay and bungling incompetence. It has nothing to offer to the world or to its followers. Ex-Christadelphians have changed all that. Over past years, many hundreds of intelligent Christadelphians have left the religion and set out to discover the truth about life and the wondrous universe in which we live. What we have found will amaze you. On this website there are thousands of articles, videos and comments by ex-Christadelphians who have discovered the truth about the Bible. We explain how the creation and flood narratives in Genesis were based on ancient cuneiform pagan creation myths that were reworked by the Jews in Babylonian captivity to provide a beginning to the Bible. These myths were invented and written down by humans with no help from a supernatural god. We explain why prominent Israeli university professors now believe that archaeology proves that the Bible stories about the patriarchs cannot be true. There was no Moses, no Hebrew sojourn in Egypt, no Exodus, no wandering in the desert of Sinai, and no conquest of the promised land by Joshua. None of these things happen because the archaeological evidence for them is simply not there. These early stories in the Bible were edited and redacted in the 7th century BC to provide a fictitious history for the Jews in Babylon. There was no great empire of Solomon as described in the Bible. Jerusalem was only a remote hilltop fort in the 10th century BC, and not the capital of a great and wealthy empire. The prophets of Israel were hopelessly wrong in their predictions about Tyre, Egypt, and everything else that they predicted. The return from Babylonian exile was completely different to what they predicted, and modern-day events in Israel flatly contradict the predictions of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, and the other prophets. Daniel was written by 4 different authors in 2 different languages over a period of hundreds of years. Modern scholarship has shown that the Gospels were written decades after the events they describe by writers who were pretending to be the original apostles. It has demonstrated that more than half of the epistles in the New Testament were forgeries. The resurrection of Christ is a fabricated story lacking in any form of credible evidence. From start to finish, the Bible is a nonsensical work produced by humans with no evidence that a supernatural God was involved. At Christadelphians we reject these old superstitions and instead we embrace science and human understanding. We seek to educate our readers with the latest thinking from the world's brightest academic minds as to how our universe, life, living species, and everything that we know came to be. Christadelphians say that we have nothing to live for, but we know that they have nothing to die for, because they have been deceived by ancient, primitive-minded humans who have fooled them into a belief in a fantasy afterlife. We Christadelphians have everything to live for, because we know that this precious life is our only chance to make something good of our lives. Christadelphianism was founded by a man who kept slaves and opposed their freedom. Now is the time for the emancipation of the Christadelphians from a lifetime of servitude to a mistaken religion.